If you are a frequent listener to the podcast, you know that we have been sponsored by Fuji Sports for quite some time now. Whether you're looking for apparel, equipment, bags, or accessories, Fuji Sports has got it covered. Go to fujisports.com to see the latest selection of everything you need for your jiu-jitsu, judo, or MMA journey. That's fujisports.com. Let me take a minute to tell you about RŌL TV. If you're looking to take your jiu-jitsu to the next level and supplement your BJJ education, then RŌL TV has you covered. RŌLAcademy.tv has over 1,500 videos covering individual techniques, positions, and concepts, including seminars and workshops with top-level competitors and instructors like Chris Wojcik, Robert Drysdale, Aaron Hurley, Emily Kwok, and more. Whether you are a beginner or more advanced student, RŌL TV is the online platform that can take your jiu-jitsu to the next level. What's up, everyone, and welcome back. If you haven't already, please hit the like, share, download, listen, and whatever other button there is, and leave us a review wherever you do listen. This makes sure that we can continue bringing you the amazing guests and content that you have come to expect. On this 2024 recap, Thomas and newly promoted black belt Russ Usauskas discuss the past year's episodes, including stats, clips from some of our favorite guests, and more. And listen next week for all new episodes for what we are positive will be another great year for the RŌL Radio.
Welcome to RŌL Radio.
So we are live for Recap 2024, and what a great way to finish the year. I already messed up this episode. Ross, welcome to the show. I forgot to record it. We had a 6-minute conversation before I caught that. But thanks for being here. Let's try this one more time.
Take two.
Take two. Take two. What's your perspective on the journey so far? So for those of you who don't know, recently awarded black belts, stepping into the professor role for you, life seems like is good, but yet such a big change, often associated with insignificant changes, if you will. Did anything change for you, or did just kind of operations like any other day?
So like we were talking about before, we didn't catch it. It's kind of one of those, everything changed, but it also stayed the same. Still going to classes, all those things, but now, especially I was saying open mat yesterday and Sunday, I'm up there if I'm teaching a class anyway, but then they're saying, oh, professor, you pick. So it's kind of just that change of hearing that sometimes. That's been, I think, the biggest thing is just hearing it, because it's still, everything is business as usual, like you just said.
So what you're saying essentially that people view you differently, but for you, not much has changed.
I think at this point, I feel a little bit more motivated at the moment, maybe, as I've been exploring things, looking for different topics for the class that I teach. But I feel like it's been somewhat the same.
Well, I guess that's the good thing,
yeah.
Right? It's the small change and keep sailing forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's the obsession with wrist locks and ankle locks? Many, especially in the local arena here at the academy, know that that's your forte. You are dangerous in that area. Where did this all start for you?
The wrist locks, I don't know. I think it just kind of stuck. I still blame you, even though you say it wasn't you, because you had to eat Greek here, and we had a whole hour and a half on wrist locks, so I think that was probably a big part of it. And I think all the ankle locks, foot locks, all those things, it was all, I started in 2015 when all of that was really kind of blowing up. You had like the Danaher Death Squad coming up, so it was always there, and it was getting really big, but we weren't doing it at the time. So then coming here, again, you kind of open that door and let that monster out of the closet.
Is that what it is? Is a monster out of the closet?
I think we're finding a common thread here. I think you've allowed both of those things to happen.
Oh, great. How is that I'm getting blamed for your awesomeness?
I don't know.
So life has been pretty good. Journey has been pretty good. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of positive in your life as you continue going through the journey and through this experiment of jiu-jitsu, if you will.
Absolutely.
So I know you listen to the podcast, at least in larger way. What's the big takeaways for you? What's the thing that you're seeking in listening to some of the conversations we've had and some of the guests we had on the podcast?
One of the big takeaways is just the exposure to different people who I would not have otherwise found. So that's been kind of nice because it opens up just exploration, whether it be following their journey, hearing their story, seeing techniques that they're showing, whether it's on YouTube, Instagram, wherever they're posting their different things. But then also sometimes too, I think hearing their story, hearing them talk about like teaching, for example, it helps you gain a different perspective because it gives you their view on it. And I think sometimes hearing other people's views, especially as listening when I was starting teaching here, it would just kind of supplement it to any learning that I might have been doing outside.
Do you feel like that's important for the students? Hearing the stories and being part of, a larger perspective, if you will?
I think it helps, especially if people are going through something, whether it be outside of jiu-jitsu struggles, with the large number of guests that have been on here, you can kind of hear what other people have gone through. So sometimes maybe they were having the same issues that you are as a student. Sometimes you just hear of an issue that you didn't even think was an issue for somebody. So it gives you that like behind the scenes look, and I think it's always important, and it just kind of it helps connect people in the sense of, because they get that behind the curtain look, they see some people in a little bit more of a normal sense, not an elevated sense that sometimes people might be in.
Do you have any favorites? Any favorite guests that we've had in the?
There's been a lot of them, and unfortunately, a lot of them have kind of blended together at this point. But I know one of the more recent ones that is included was Brian Glick. That was one of the ones that I enjoyed.
Yeah, and we'll talk about. We have some clips for you guys. 5 clips that I selected kind of to chat about some of the ones that really stuck with me. But here's some interesting things. I mean, as it stands right now, we have some big names on the top of the most listened, right? And at this point, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of different people listening through all of this. And Jorge Gracie is still number 1. We have Henry Atkins. The episode's 42. There's a very long, quite a bit ago. It's over 3.5 years ago, and I just had Henry Atkins for the second time right before this episode. So make sure you guys listen to both of those. But Leah Stump is number 3, and Jorge Gracie is number 4, 5, and then Neil Mendelson, and we have Chris Burns creeped up all the way up to the top 10. So a lot of big names. What's your perspective on these? I mean, some of these names are quite present in jiu-jitsu community, and putting them, in front of a microphone and creating some of these exposure points and having these conversations. What's your take on some of those big names?
So I always enjoyed when you had like the Dirty Dozen on, when you were collecting kind of all of those different people to be on, because it was interesting hearing that story. And I think when you had like Robert Drysdale on too, you hear about the history, and a lot of other martial arts, it goes back so far, but jiu-jitsu as we kind of know it is really that old. So a lot of these pioneers, they're still kind of fresh, if that makes sense. They're not that far gone. So you're still able to capture that. So you're still getting kind of that living history. And so it's always interesting hearing from that development and seeing how they help shape what we have currently.
Yeah, that's always interesting, right? Hearing some of and you're right. Jiu-jitsu is not that old. I mean, truthfully, it's a couple generations. I mean, we talk about like Chris Howder or any of the Dirty Dozens. I mean, all of these guys are around, and they are not that old. I mean, it's just a generation before us. which makes it. Do you ever think about that? Like you are part of, the third or fourth, whatever generation of black belts that essentially kind of exists in this country. I mean, in 20 years or 30 years, this is going to be meaningful, isn't it?
Well, I hadn't thought about that part till just now. But no, it's not, like you just said, it's not that far removed from that original generation, which is one of the things I think that is cool, because you can still access that original group to whatever degree that may be. So you're still catching just kind of the beginning of things.
Yeah. No, I agree. Here's an interesting fact about, the podcast is that 85% of people listen from United States, obviously, but there is 8% from Europe and 3% from Australia. I did not know that we had actually following in Australia. I mean, as insignificant 3% is, there is a group of people listening over there. So that's, shout out to Australians. I mean, that's, good for you guys. That's awesome. I love it. Oh, I thought you want to say something.
No.
So all these things create a very interesting perspective. Like I oftentimes think about it as, who is listening on the other side. Like it's very easy to submerge yourself in these conversations and listening to the story, but there's truly somebody listening out there. So shout out to all of you guys. Are you ready for clip number one?
Sure.
To get into some of this and start having the conversation. Eddie Combs was on the episode 180. That's earlier this year. A little bit of a 3-minute clip. Let's take a listen. Let's chat about this, because Eddie was a great guest, great episode. Make sure you guys tune into that one, listen to the whole thing. But before we do that, let's take a look. Let's take a listen. Is looking at this from a very high 40,000-foot view. Isn't what we do used to be new school at some point in the past?
I think what I do and what was being done is still new school, because the new school don't have that. The evolution to the sportive idea, which is great. I enjoy it. I mean, I like to sit down and watch it and observe it, but I don't buy into that. It's not something I buy into. What we were seeing back then was an evolutionary process. And a prime example is this. Let's talk about the GOAT that we all know, who I consider someone to be the greatest exponent of jiu-jitsu to ever come out of the Gracie family, as we know, Rickson Gracie. Let's just talk about that for a second. In his early days of fighting, do you think he's doing the same things as he was then, now?
Oh, probably not. I mean, I don't know.
So there's been an evolution,
Yeah.
but the evolution is still the same. The message hasn't changed. The message is still, how do we handle serious business should it arise? Not how do we score points in a tournament, or how do I teach, how do I alienate a 45-year-old mom or an overweight guy or an elderly man from coming to train at my academy and provide them with the service for the community? How do I do that? How do I push those away and just have the athletes come in? The problem today, I think, is people are looking to have an athletic team, which I'm not. They're looking to be the greatest athlete, which I'm not, which my students are not. And we flourish in that environment because of the teachings of the old school. Now, everything to me goes full cycle, in my opinion. We're seeing an emergence of the new school jiu-jitsu, your Gordon Ryans, your John Danaher, Def Squads, your B teams, all of these kids are growing up. They're amazing athletes. They really are. But I think when push comes to shove, the purpose of why I teach and why I learn jiu-jitsu, why I practice and study and nerd out with jiu-jitsu, is to handle real life situation and not to be butt scooting down the supermarket more after somebody should that need arise. And I know that's funny. But we will only resort to the way we train when we stress inoculate that environment. If we do not, then we can't just say, oh, today I'm going to be a tournament fighter and tomorrow I'm going to do this. And I'm not training super athletes. Super athletes are something else. I have them in my academy, but that's a different category of person. regardless of how great they are. In combat, in real life combat, and we see this in the UFC, if I go back to teaching, if I go back to fighting in the street or in that environment, and I finger jab someone in their eyes, which is taught by us in the school, which was taught to me, finger jab. When we see this in the highest elite competition in combat sport, what happens to the athlete when they take a finger jab in the eye?
Call time.
Pause or disqualified. Yeah, absolutely.
Does that not allow the 45-year-old mom that I'm talking about to get away from that situation? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So that's where I place my focus and values, and we're very successful, and we're very, very good at that.
All right, Ross. Somewhat controversial clip. Some might disagree with this. What's your take on the old school versus new school perspective, especially what Eddie Cohn was talking about?
First, I think Wednesday night has a new technique to implement. The eye poking in there.
Yeah, he's stabbing. He's stabbing.
Yeah. But I think it's true. I think you see a lot of programs that have drifted away from the self-defense aspect, like he's talking about, where it all came out of, and it goes to a lot of just competition-minded, a lot of sport-minded, a lot of IBJJF type, like rule sets, and that's what they're focusing on. But I also think it's hard to, with some of the self-defense aspects, if you don't know who that person is that you're going to sometimes, and I have run into this before where they want to teach you a knife or gun disarming technique, and you're kind of thinking, well, how do I know this person even though they have X number of degrees on their belt? How do I know what they're teaching me is legitimate? And someone just walking fresh off the street may not be able to really flush that out and determine. So I think that it does provide some challenges if that's what you're looking for, because you kind of want to know that that person you're learning from has a little bit of a background like that, and that, can be a little bit hard.
Do you think that the traditional self-defense approach to jiu-jitsu will fade away at some point, and we'll just hyper-focus on even no-gi grappling? I mean, that seems to be in the upside growth of what the sport is all about these days.
I know you've had guests talk about the no-gi versus gi becoming which one will stay and will one disappear. I think it's kind of the same thing with self-defense. They're all going to be around. They're all going to exist just because that's oftentimes what brings people in. They say, oh, I want to learn how to defend myself. So it's always got to be there in some part. So I think you're always going to have parts of it, whether or not it's the focus, still always going to have some parts of it, because that's going to bring a lot of people in initially.
Do you feel that separation will continue growing and like growing apart more, meaning we'll see a little bit more of the divide between sport grappling, no-gi grappling, and more of a traditional jiu-jitsu approach, with some of the more traditional self-defense oriented systems or just approach to jiu-jitsu?
I think you will, only because as like the athletes are getting paid more and more, and as that's becoming a push with a lot of organizations, I think it just naturally creates that divide where that's what people want to focus on. They want to specialize. If you're specializing, you're kind of pulling away from the mainstream, right? So the more they focus on getting paid, the more they're going to try to specialize for, even if it's rule sets. So you're going to see that separation. But I think as long as there are still schools, again, you're going to have the availability of everything. There are going to be people who like it, irregardless of what they want to do, because not everybody wants to compete. Some people just want to come in and learn jiu-jitsu. So I think you'll still see everything.
Do you feel like the students gravitate towards more of the sport aspect of it because they see it so much? It's just visible. And, again, if you are not attending any classes whatsoever and just watch jiu-jitsu, one might even think that self-defense factor doesn't even exist. Like, that's not what jiu-jitsu is.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a tough one, because if you aren't exposed to it, if you're someone who's just looking for a martial art maybe,
Mm-hmm.
you're not necessarily going to know about the whole sports side of things. Whereas someone who's watching, maybe they have a friend who's watching it, they're going to pull them into more of a sports side. So I think you've got that branch where it's two different parts. So I think as long as people are coming into academies, they're going to be coming in for both reasons. And it's whatever your initial exposure is, what you're looking.
So do you feel that we should focus on both from that perspective? I mean, should there be each academy should have both of the focuses, or should they more specialize in one versus the other and let people choose what they want to do? I mean, whose responsibility should be to provide that education? Is it on the academy, the facility, the instructor, or is it more of a choice of a student because this is what I would like to do and this is where my focus is?
I think it's a little bit of both, just because the academies, they know what they have, they know what their student population is, right? So if they know they have mostly people in their 40s coming in, they're probably not looking at the same thing that if you have a group of very young, like 20-year-olds coming in, they're probably going to be going for a little bit more of a heavy competition. And so I think it's knowing what type of population you have around that academy, but then it's also up to the students, because if you find that that academy doesn't fit, then you may have to relocate at some point to what does fit what your goals are.
Yeah, and sometimes that's hard, isn't it? I mean, it making those choices is difficult, especially deeper you are into it, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
we create some of the relationships, or we create bonds, and we like people that we hang out with, and then making that choice sometimes is difficult, isn't it?
It is. It
Yeah.
definitely, and there are schools that they make you feel like, well, why are you leaving? Why aren't we good enough? And they kind of get that hold into you. So I think that for some people that makes things difficult too, because although we want to believe that those things aren't still happening, we know they are. You hear about it, so I think that adds a layer of difficulty if you think, hey, I want to leave because the school's offering me something that better aligns with my goals.
Yeah, I mean that's a big topic of conversation in the last few years, especially as we kind of leading into that new age freedom kind of jujitsu of students should be empowered to do what's best for them and so on, but yet the old school is kind of still holding on to some of those big things. Do you feel like there should be complete freedom, or there's a happy medium somewhere, or where should this line be drawn as far as student and instructor relationship?
I think it's a little bit of a happy medium. You and I actually had this conversation when I first came here, because I came to RŌL as a purple belt, and you said we don't necessarily know everything. So if you can go out, and we were talking about cross training, if you're going to a seminar or another academy, maybe visiting friends, if you can go out and then bring something back that's going to benefit everybody here, why wouldn't you do that? So I think having that home base is really important. But, if every now and then you do go, because the longer you're in it, you're going to have more friends and they're going to move just because life happens. So if you can go train with someone, go to a seminar at another school, why wouldn't you want to bring things back? Because then everyone at your academy is going to be getting better because they're going to be learning what you learned. So it grows. I think the more open you are to it.
And that kind of became your thing too. I mean, you love going to seminars, you love visiting places, you love seeking the knowledge from all the resources that you have available, right? I mean, that's something you really enjoy, right?
I do. I don't know if you know, but I've tried to make it a goal for the last 2 or 3 years to visit another academy that's somewhat local that I haven't been to, just to see, meet new people. If there's a seminar that I can get to, even better. But just trying to gain a little bit more exposure just out there. So that's my goal, to try to get to one new academy every year.
What's so appealing about that?
Just seeing, just again, it's just getting new partners, right? Because we see the same people oftentimes over and over again. So we know kind of what everybody does. So getting to try things without necessarily jumping into competition, seeing if something works, maybe something we've been playing around with, just learning from more people too, because again, we're in the same environment, right? So if we're going somewhere else, we're going to a seminar, it's new exposures, and I think that just is one of the things that helps us. They may see something that we're doing that nobody else is, and they might say, hey, if you just put your hand there instead, you're going to have a lot more success. So I think that there's a lot of benefit of getting to just see other people.
Yeah, I wish more people saw it that way, and I wish more people were so open-minded in that sense. I think jiu-jitsu community would be a very different place, but it is what it is. I think it's all part of that evolution, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
if we all didn't push, and if we all push in one direction, it would be kind of boring in a sense, right? It would be status quo. All right, well, let's get to clip number 2, episode 181. Brandon was on that episode, and this clip is a little bit longer, about 5 minutes, but let's take a listen to it, and let's see what conclusions we can draw.
The one ingredient that everybody has to have is you got to do it all the time for a long time. And he saw that I was the kind of person who was going to do it all the time for a long time, and that was worth him investing some of his love into, and so that's what he did. And so even when there was no real good reason to believe that I would be good at jiu-jitsu, he was gracious with his time. He was gracious with his knowledge, and he's just always been really special. Eddie's always been really special to me.
At which point do you realize that doing all the time for a very long time is an important factor behind jiu-jitsu skill set, or really the developing or continue doing this? Do you have like an aha moment at what point of training, or like, damn, I really got to do this for a while?
Well, I think so. I'm 25 when I start martial arts, right? And so for me, I'm already like a fledgling adult. So I've already seen this be true in other fields, like we brought up guitar, like music. I know some great musicians, grew up with some incredible musicians. And even at that time, I knew some really, really amazing guitar players, especially. But what did they all have in common is they've been playing for years and years and years. And they practice all the time. Like, okay. And I grew up loving basketball. Like, yeah, there's a lot of like talented people in basketball, but the people that are really making it happen, they do it all day, every day, and they've been doing that for 10 years or 20 years. You know what I'm saying? So what I may not have like consciously understood it, but I did understand it because I'd seen skill development already in 2 other fields, like high level skill development. And so, yeah, maybe I don't consciously note that, but I know what it takes to get good at a thing. And it's not about the method as much as it is about the culture and the consistency.
Well, let me ask you then, Brandon. So how come, if you see it, how come most people don't? Like, why is it so difficult for us as humans to just simply, and today instructors know this. Hey, listen, this is a marathon. You got to invest yourself. You get consistency, and the long investment is what gets you successful in jiu-jitsu. And even if they preach this, even if they recommend this or suggest this to the students, most, not all, but most don't see it, don't feel it.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think most people do, especially coaches, if they're good, if they're a black belt, they do understand that.
I was talking about students.
Yeah,
I was talking about students.
Like the
students.
Yeah.
Oh, well, most people have, they just don't, they've never been around a high skill level individual. You know, like most people, like we grow up and our dad works at a factory or he's a lawyer or whatever, and he just kind of comes home and then he's at home and then he goes to work. You don't see the skill development because you don't listen to him talk about his law practice or whatever. But the way he got to be a good lawyer was, doing law for a long time and going to school. But because it's not an interesting thing to you, maybe you don't like dig in and really understand what made him good at his thing, or even understand that he is good. It's just a job. But I think most people just don't get to spend time around high skill individuals. But anybody that's a high skill individual has gone through the same process, which is they do it all the time, and they've done it for a long time.
I mean, you're absolutely right. If you talk to anybody who has achieved a point of success in their life, on the mat, off the mat, jiu-jitsu, non-jiu-jitsu, business, doesn't matter, sports, all of them will tell you that motivation will get you started, but consistency and determination will really get you in the long term to the goals and levels of success that you can really achieve.
Yeah, I feel like motivation is a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you have to be motivated enough to start and to do the thing, but really what you need is to do the thing even when you're not motivated. And I think that that's what separates the wheat from the chaff.
I agree 100%. The consistency and determination that you like it, you don't like it. Is it raining, snowing? Doesn't matter. You just do it. You keep showing up. You just keep showing up.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that? Motivation versus determination, consistency. I mean, it's, you recently received your black belt. I mean, all that, there must be some truth around that, right?
I think it's the discipline. Maybe not specifically named, but just that discipline to keep going a lot of times. The motivation gets you started. There's something that brought you in, right? No matter whatever the reason. So that was your motivation. But it gets to that point of there has to be a discipline to just keep coming, where you have the days that you don't feel like coming, right? But then still just know that you have to keep going. And I don't know your thought on this, but I think one of the interesting things too is you do have to know when to take a break. Just even if it's one day in the week, and know that, hey, it's okay. Something came up at home. I usually go on Tuesdays. Something came up. I can't go on Tuesdays. And I think that's underestimated. So I don't know your thoughts on that either.
Yeah, no, the breaks are really important. It's not even the breaks, but the agile approach to all of this. So I think a lot of people take consistency as I'm going to be there every Monday. I'm going to be there, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then they cannot make one of the days, and then the pressure of inconsistency starts raising, the anxiety of I missed a day, right? So there's a lot of truth behind being agile in that sense, and saying, listen, I couldn't make this. Either I'm taking a break for a reason, or I can make up that day on a different day, right? And making those smart choices is important. But on the flip side of all of this, one day off, if it turns into 2, if it turns into a week, if it turns into 4 weeks, then a month, then 2, then 3, and then a few months later, you're like, okay, I'm done, I'm going to come back. Those comebacks are very difficult.
I would agree. But I think it depends why you're taking that break, right?
True.
Are you taking it because kid was sick at home, someone's sick, or are you taking it because you just don't want to go? And then I think that's what leads to that 2 days, 3 days. But taking any extended time off, whether it's injuries or life, it is hard. I know I was gone, I think it was almost 10, 11 months. Coming back for that first time, it's hard. And you just, you have to make the time to get back.
How do you maneuver through situations like this? So, painting a big picture, you off for extensive period of time, whether it's 3 or 10 months, it doesn't matter, extensive period of time. 1, your peers moved on. 2, you haven't gained what they have, but yet probably even more so, you probably regressed in a lot of areas, physically and mentally, right? Even if you stay sharp, you're still regressing a little bit. This is all perishable skill. Coming back with the expectations of not only where you were before is probably unrealistic, but also oftentimes we are like, oh, I was with this guy, I could hang with that guy, and now he's miles in front of you while you take a few steps back. That's a real challenge for many, right?
Yeah, I think that definitely provides a challenge that people come back for a short time and then they leave because they're just not able break through that mentally. One of the things I think that kind of came up with all the clips that you had today is it's all a little bit the mental part of things. And I think that's hard because I know personally it was timing that went away. I knew what I wanted to do, but it just wouldn't happen. So I think that's the challenge. You know what you want to do when you're coming back, but it doesn't always work. So now you're behind that person. You're not able to do what you were able to do in the past, and it's just building and building. So it's hard, and you have to have that determination that I want to get back to this again because I enjoyed it, and you have to keep going. And marathon versus a sprint kind of thing.
Do you feel that it's easier to come back at the earlier stage of the journey, like white or blue belt, or is it easier to come back when you are more seasoned, purple, brown, or maybe even a black?
I think it probably depends on the person.
Okay.
Because some people, they don't care and they're just like, okay, I'm back. I just want to do this again. So I don't think for someone like that it matters where they are in their journey. But I think someone who's struggling and who was probably struggling anyway when they left, I think they're going to have a really hard time. But if it's just something you enjoy doing, even if it's hard, you're still going to come back. You're going to be happy you're here.
Do you feel like you can tell whether students will stay or they are in the gray fadeaway area, if you will? Like a lot of instructing to refer to this, that person who walks into the academy, they already know if they are done or not. Do you have that feeling with your students as you go through it?
So I don't have that for longevity, but for a while I was teaching like our fundamentals classes, and I would get, if I wasn't teaching that class, I was just there taking it, I would get a lot of trial students, and I had a pretty good gauge of who was going to sign up. But
Okay.
as far as longevity, that one still hasn't developed.
Maybe that's the Yoda wisdom right there.
Yeah, maybe that's what's next.
But there are common denominators across all of this, right? Like you see patterns as you, same thing with skill development. As you see your students, you see this. Oh yeah, we're not gonna get rid of this guy. He's gonna be here for a while.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, and I think it's hard too because right out of the gate, like everybody, especially with so much information now being available, people just they kind of get obsessed with it, right? Whether it's coming 5 days a week, if that's what their schedule allows, it's spending every free moment, listening to podcasts, watching, YouTube clips, instructionals. So it's hard because so many people, they get so attached so quickly that I think it makes it difficult sometimes sticking around just because they're so into it.
Do you think it's possible to retain everybody? Like, is that even realistic approach, or you feel that people will fade away?
Unfortunately, I don't think it's realistic, and I think some of it's just the timing of life when you start. Too many controlling priorities. It's almost got to be the right time, and there has to be too, depending on home situations, there has to be understanding at home, and if you can't line that up, it's always going to be a struggle, and I think that's going to, for a lot of people, is one of the things that forces them to step away. Is it becomes too much of a struggle. So if you don't have understanding support at home, if there is a home, someone at home, that adds layers of difficulty.
Yeah. Those are the sacrifices that we often talk about, right? That sacrifice not only takes place on our side, but also those around us. So especially if especially if you have family that depends on you, and that time is in a great value. Like, just it is what it is, right?
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's dig into Brian Glick. I mean, one of the bigger names in jiu-jitsu education, if you will. What a brilliant mind. What a great conversation that was. And this clip is short, but I think there has a lot of little hidden gems here. So let's take a listen.
My teacher was not a physically, gifted person. And so I think, he had this bum hip and he had this bum knee, and like he had these kind of, in some ways, like limitations. And as a result of that, I think he was able to craft like a view of jiu-jitsu, like an approach to jiu-jitsu that took into account the fact that, hey, like maybe you're not going to have all of the attributes of like a winning athlete, and certainly, as you point out, even people who have attributes of winning athletes, that stuff doesn't stay. Everything changes, and most things, at least like, physically, eventually degrade. So what we have control over are skills. We have control over decisions we make, and we have control over like what we prioritize. So if you can make good decisions and have strong skills and prioritize well, then you're going to have a pretty good shot, as far as I can see, of being able to have a jiu-jitsu practice that's 20 or 30 or 40 years long.
Jiu-jitsu practice 30, 40, or 50 years long. I mean, that's a lot of freaking mat time.
Yeah, that's a long one.
But do you agree with that? That as we continue aging, things change, and perhaps you're not there yet. You're a young stud, but guys on my side of the fence, we have our own aches and pains and all that, and I feel like the wear and tear will catch all of us at some point or another. Even if we stop training, I think some of the wear and tear will catch up. What's your perspective on this?
So I feel like I've seen that with people, right? Over the years, you can see just physically them changing. You can see how what they do changes because they're just not able to do certain things anymore. They have those injuries that provide limitations. We also have people that come in all the time that have the existing injuries. So dealing with that, I know there's enough students here you've seen that they do have certain limitations. So I think if you're smart and you kind of look to those people early on and you see how they adapt, I think that kind of helps us too, and that goes to making good decisions. It also, when we have that little lingering issue, right? Like taking that one day off, doing something to recover. And I think there wasn't, going back, how he's saying 20, 30, 40 years, right? If that's going to be what we want our longevity to be, that wasn't always a focus, right? And there's been a lot more focus on recovery, I think, the last few years. So that's going to only aid in that longevity.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think we're getting smarter and smarter when it comes to that, and that's a good thing. I mean, I don't know about you, but like I remember when I was starting, there was no such thing as freaking being smart about it. It was balls to the wall and freaking skulls into the mat. I mean, like it's, and a lot of us, from that time when I was starting, I know a lot of the guys literally share the same thing, that those aches and pains are surfacing now. That's when we start feeling that, and it is what it is. Do you ever feel that jiu-jitsu will become at some point a sport where it's looked at from a very professional perspective, where that recovery is very present and we really take care of our bodies more than we ever have in the past?
Absolutely. I think you're seeing it more and more with higher level competitors already. You're seeing them having focuses and getting specific trainers, dietitians. They're seeking out different recovery methods. So I think you're starting to see that. I think it's still in its infancy because people haven't gotten it all together yet. But I think as these bigger teams keep emerging, you have a lot of individual athletes who are getting very far with it. But as those bigger teams keep coming up, they're going to offer more and more to the athlete, right? Like any professional sports team. And then that's just going to push it. And then once one starts, they see results, you're just going to keep seeing it progress more and more.
And that's the interesting part. I think oftentimes we don't realize, at least I don't realize, how small jiu-jitsu is. I mean, it's big, but in relation to other professional sports, we are so insignificant. It's ridiculous. I mean, great. Like, you go to ADCC or CGI this past year, and I mean, enormous response, right? I mean, hundreds of thousands of people present in the arenas, both of them, and then millions watching it online. I mean, what a huge success for both of the events. But still, I feel like this is so insignificant to other professional sports. We have so much to grow.
Absolutely. Especially just looking at how many people truly know what jiu-jitsu is, how many
Mhm.
people know what those events are. Where I think if you said, oh, the Super Bowl, right? Maybe that's a
Mhm.
little bit on the far end of things, but even just a regular football game, people know what that is, even if they don't follow sports. Where I think you're not going to find as many people who know what ADCC is, even if they're not following it.
You know, like I recently had Stitch Duran on a show, and I mean, the Cotton from UFC,
Mhm.
and you know, I asked him flat out, do you think that boxing will disappear, will ever be replaced um, by UFC or by MMA? And he says, no, there is no way. I mean, maybe here in this country, you know, boxing is shrinking, and it's shrinking. It is what it is. The mixed martial arts is taking over that demographic, but in other countries, boxing is so present and so strong that, you know, he doesn't believe that that's going to completely disappear. So there's a lot to say about that. Like, the growth of some of those organic and well embedded, rooted sports is so large, and jiu-jitsu is still very, very young. Only a few decades, if you think about it. I mean, that's so young, right?
Mhm. You know, and like you just said, it's part of the culture too. So if that's in the culture, then that's gonna help keep something around. So just the more jiu-jitsu, the more we can get that just ingrained in different areas of everybody's life, the more that can get cemented in. But again, things like boxing, that's just part of, like you said, cultures in other countries. Other martial arts are more popular in other countries too. Um, so I think just the more we can cement it in.
Well, even if you look at jiu-jitsu itself, like, granted, yes, 1920s, okay, that's where, you know, things started, or that's what, you know, it's considered as an anchor of all of this, right? But then, you know, jiu-jitsu didn't look the same way as it does now. Like, fine, IBJJF in 90s, okay, fine, but again, that's not what it looks like today. So, like, some really consider last few years as that that pivot point of this growth, this enormous exploration and expansion of what grappling really is. So some might argue that this is just getting started.
Probably. And you know, all of the knowledge sharing too that we have now,
Good point.
that didn't exist. So without that, we probably wouldn't have progressed as far as we are, or as quickly. Because if you look at that progression from where things were in the 1920s, how long did it take to get to where it was, like at the beginning of the UFC, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now you have all these other avenues where people can go out and seek knowledge without even having to step into an academy, right? So they're able to do so much more learning on their own. It's readily available. It's free in a lot of senses too. So they're just able to just consume so much more that we're able to progress a lot further and faster.
Well, and speaking of a lot of deep knowledge, the next clip I have pulled up was Kenny Kim. I mean, what a brilliant mind, younger generation. I mean, great story. If you guys haven't listened to that episode, it's 188. You got to listen to this. The guy sleeps on the mats. I mean, it's broke. I mean, he doesn't care about anything else. What is talk about sacrifices? And today, one of the bigger names in online education of jiu-jitsu, and then his academy is so big and so beautiful. What a great story. Let's take a listen to that one. You get armbar by a lady who is 20 years Darcy by Darcy. What's your first impression of this experience?
I'm like, no, I was like, no, I made a mistake.
That was fluke.
Wasn't right. Yes, that's, you know, we hear this all the time. I hear it all the time, and I always tell this story to my wife too, because I'm like, Trust me. I'm like, no, I made a mistake. No, let's go again. Let's go again. And then I'm going harder, trying, using my strength, this, that. And, I mean, she was one. And then there was other guys that were, I mean, I'm not a big guy, but there was other guys that were smaller than I was. And these guys wiped the mat with me. And it was, it was one of those things like, I think most people, you have two different types of people. You have people that are going to be like myself and probably you and the rest of the world that trains jiu-jitsu, like, I want to do this. I want to get better at this. And then you have the other side that's like, you know what? It's not for me because excuse A, B, C, D, whatever the excuse may be. But in reality, they don't want to face the truth of them getting their egos checked. They're better than that, right? So you have, I believe you're categorized into those two people. Either you are or you aren't.
Either one is better than the other?
Well, I'm going to say the one that accepts it and says, I want this challenge because I just got my ass kicked by Darcy, who's 45 years old. Whereas I could have been like, no, that was a mistake. I wasn't ready. I was feeling sick that day. I don't really know the rules. So you know what? It's not for me. But if I see her on the street, I'm going to knock her out. I know I'm better than that. Like,
watch out, Darcy.
Darcy's been warned officially.
Yes.
Why do you think it's so difficult for people to admit their shortcomings or their areas where they can improve? Listen, let's just stop beating around the bush. Like, there are things that we suck at. As simple as that. There are things that I suck at. It just is what it is. Why is it so hard to admit it?
Yeah, but I think it's because now you're a black belt, you're trained jiu-jitsu. I think that opens us up to admitting that it's okay to make flaws and it's okay to ask for help. It's okay that we're not perfect, that we're not good at everything that we do.
That was funny.
Yeah.
The whole episode is just such a deep story, but he's such a funny guy. And have you ever found yourself in that situation when you get tapped out by somebody, you're like, no, I wasn't ready. Hold on, let's do this one more time.
Yeah, there's been a couple people where you just look at him and you're like, oh, I'm 60 pounds heavier than you. And all of a sudden, like, what just happened?
Isn't that like the epiphany of jiu-jitsu? Isn't that like the underlining card here that it really, there is a point of manipulation. It despite the size difference or strength difference.
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of how, I think we've all been sold on it at some point where, oh, it doesn't matter the size, a smaller person can get it. So I think it is interesting. And on the flip side, I think it's interesting too when you know something's happening to you, but you don't know what they're doing. And you're just kind of sitting there saying, something's coming, but what is it? I've been there quite a few times too.
The point of anticipation is like, I don't feel comfortable here, but
yeah. And then you almost get to the point where you're like, well, let's see what's coming because I think it might be something cool, even though I'm about to tap. It's also an interesting one.
Is that something that keeps you in the point of curiosity, the unknown of what might be happening, even though you know it's bad news, but yet keeps you curious?
I think it's one of the things. I think the other thing too is, I think sometimes when you're watching people who are very skilled, especially if you're just starting, that could be kind of a relative comparison. Things often look simple and look easy enough, and then when you go to do them, you're like, wait, why isn't this working? Or I can't move that way. So I think, and I know for me, that was one of the things that early on was things just look so simple a lot of times. And again, it's because the person doing it has done it so many times and has that skill set. So then that just, it kind of, I think it tricks you a little bit. You think, oh, I can do that. And then you discover very quickly, oh, no, you can't.
And that's often underestimated by students. I feel like it. Like, I feel like sometimes we are talking about something very simplistic, and yet we can talk about it for 2 hours because
Absolutely.
the amount of depth that we can go into is often underestimated.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot to be said for that, and I think it's like you just said, it's often underestimated. And I know, especially you get a class where there's only a few people that show up, and you really start kind of breaking things down a little bit, and all of a sudden, sometimes that plan for the class can get a little derailed. But then at the end, you're like, wait a minute, we just had a 20-minute conversation on moving, whatever it is, a grip, changing a position, and all of a sudden it just opened up so many doors for people. That really was a good thing.
And the cool part about all of this is like more we gain knowledge like this, more opportunities we have, and it becomes this oftentimes exchange of he's 3 steps ahead of me, or like he can read my mind in a sense, and the feeling of powerless.
Yep.
Like you are in a trap.
Mhm.
You just pick which way you're gonna go down.
Yeah. Which one do you prefer not to go through?
Right, exactly, right. I mean that speaks of a certain level of mastery, right?
And it's, which way am I not getting smashed? That's your choice, but then it's kind of their thing of which way do I want to lead them to? It's not even what do I want to do, it's how do I want to lead them, which I think is kind of one of those takeaways too for outside of jiu-jitsu. When we're looking at things, making the choices like you heard in the clips, or making decisions, it's all leading yourself or other people down a certain path. So I think it's a good takeaway outside the academies.
We're just in the business of manipulating people.
Pretty much. Manipulating them and folding them like laundry, right?
In their own clothes, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. All right. Well, last clip that we have is from episode 216, Mika Breakefield, and let's take a listen.
In most wrestling matches, like most MMA fights, the tap is mental. The physical tap ends up happening after, or the pin, or but a lot of times pins happen because that person knew there was no way out, and it was kind of an easier way out. And in MMA in particular, I'd say like 90% of rear naked chokes are not because the person's jiu-jitsu was better. It's because that person was done, and that was their way out.
Do you think that makes it a little bit easier in jiu-jitsu perspective, that we can essentially tap, reset, and start over any given time, versus in the other situations you're describing, there's more of a, you got to be checked out mentally. Like you got to, like that occurs first before that physical aspect of it.
Yeah, I think tapping has kind of become a little too common nature, and like it should be hard to tap you when you're rolling, even if you're going like I think people like tap and reset a little too much, and I think wrestlers never had that option. So when you put wrestlers in a situation with jits guys, they kind of like know in their like in the back of their head that like this guy's gonna quit. And that makes it's so hard to do jiu-jitsu against someone who's very confident that you'll quit and they know how to defend themselves.
And even vice versa. If the wrestler is down on point and jiu-jitsu guy is dominating, tapping the wrestler out is probably much harder because their mental state is, I'm not giving this up. I got plenty in to go. Wouldn't that be correct?
Yeah, I think no wrestler, maybe it's a little different now, but like 20 years ago, no wrestler in the history of wrestling did wrestling because it was like really cool, and they were gonna like get all the girls, and like they were gonna like make money. Like people wrestled because it was like a deep desire within them that they didn't really have a choice, and it like boiled out of them. And there's not a lot of sports where people do such an uncool, hard thing and make their whole life kind of revolve around it. So it's like a different breed of people who wrestle.
So what's your perspective on this? You're a wrestling coach. You help with wrestling a little bit here. What's your perspective on quitting tapping between wrestlers and jiu-jitsu guys?
So I think it's interesting. Coaching is a little bit, maybe a bit of a stretch, since it's mostly all the 4, 5, and 6-year-olds. So it might be a little bit of a stretch, and my background is not wrestling, it's jiu-jitsu, but it translates well enough for those kids. But seeing it in like the adults that come through, it is a much different mentality. And I thought it was interesting, like he was saying, you're trying to tap them like mentally almost more than the physical part. So I thought that was a very different take on it. And when I was listening to that, I was thinking, it's interesting having been watching more wrestling, trying to learn more to help the little kids. It was a different take that I never thought about before. And it kind of made sense thinking about just rolling with some of the people who've done wrestling for a very long time. They just keep grinding on you, even if they may not know what to do. They're just trying to wear you down more and more and more. And then once we talked about this before here, you get those people that make that conversion from wrestling, and then the jujitsu switch flips, and it's a whole different type of person.
Yeah, I do feel that even though both of those sports or activities are very similar with what we do, they have very different cultural roots, if you will. Like jiu-jitsu guys are truly about, hey, let's chill, let's roll, and I don't think none of that exists in wrestling. Like, I am not a wrestler. I don't pretend I know it, but I do know what it feels like to go with a wrestler, and there is nothing chill back about it.
No, there's a definite difference. Like you just said, that culture that exists between the two different training environments is definitely different. Again, I don't have that background either, but just hearing stories from people that have wrestled, like you just said, it's much different.
Yeah, those are dangerous guys.
They are.
Why do you think the jiu-jitsu guys don't like wrestlers so much?
I mean, I would have to think that part of it is because a lot of the wrestlers come in and you have people who are definitely blue and purple belts who that wrestler just can put on their back very quickly. And I think it's hard because you think, hey, this person just came in here and I should be able to do more than I can. But you don't realize that they've been training wrestling for, maybe 10 plus years. And oftentimes that was every day, especially in that high school arena where they're doing it often. And some people are only training jiu-jitsu twice a week sometimes if they're lucky. So I don't know if you have a different feeling, but I think that's one of the challenges they have.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, it's not only the mileage on the mats, but the intensity, the fact of this grind being embedded and rooted in their mind. I mean, that's what wrestling really is, And just like Mika mentioned, there's nothing pleasant about the wrestling training. It's not because you want to chill and be cool. It is grind. It's deeply embedded in there, and you can see a lot of that as when you have the opportunity to train with these guys. At the same time, my head goes off to all of them. I mean, the grind that they go through, it's remarkable. The work ethic, physical and mental, it's something that you don't see it often, in any other sports, and especially, shout out goes to Kyle, one of our black belts. I mean, it's what a brilliant mind. And I said this when he was being promoted to black belt, is I had many conversations with him where I emphasized the fact that if you put your wrestling skills on pause for a moment, just set them aside and really learn jiu-jitsu, this merge will happen at some point. And that's when you really become dangerous, when you can leverage the mental approach of wrestling and technicality of jiu-jitsu. You become really dangerous grappler with a lot of leverage over most people.
Absolutely. And I mean, it is taking him as an example, getting to talk to him and work through things with him because we're often on the mat together. It provides a deeper exploration. And we can connect a lot more dots together because of that background. And it kind of goes back to being able to progress things further and faster. You have that knowledge background, so that makes a big difference, I think.
I had many conversations with him just from a takedown perspective. I mean, I'm come from a judo background, so it's always interesting to see how similar takedown has a very different approach or even strategy in both of the environments, and that's a big learning curve for me always. So I oftentimes, take these opportunities to pick his brain particularly, but any wrestler for that mind, and really ask a lot of questions, because that's a big part of it, right? Learning, asking questions, being vulnerable, and acknowledging that we don't know everything.
Absolutely. I actually sent Kyle a text message this morning and said, yesterday I found like a failed takedown, but I said I found a new entry from it, and I said we've got to work on that next time we're together, because I said there's something there, but I don't know what it is. And so it's that, admitting that, hey, I don't know what it is. I know you have more of wrestling skill set, so let's combine what I found with what you know, and let's see what we can come up with, because I think it's going to be something good.
I love it. That's what the collaboration. That's what makes it best for me, at least. It's acknowledging the fact, no matter how long you've been on the mat, you still have a little bit more to learn, and being vulnerable in those areas is so important, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So what's in 2025 for you? Where are you looking forward to?
I think just continuing teaching, trying to get to know more of the students too, because there's just been a lot of new people that have come in that I haven't gotten to meet yet. So I think that's going to be a big thing. Also would like to get a little bit more recording done for RŌL TV. So kind of building on what we did this last year. So I think some good opportunities coming up.
You definitely been very present at the academy, and I'm glad that you enjoy it, because not everybody does. And the vulnerability of, is there a siren? Somebody's.
I hear that. Yeah.
They're not coming after us, are they?
Let's hope not.
Having opportunities to teach is so rewarding, at least for me. Like, I love that stuff. I could do this all day long. So it's so great that you enjoy it as well.
It's another one of those doors that you opened up, and now look what's happening.
I see a pattern. Everything is my fault, huh?
It seems like it.
Well, at least you enjoy it. So that's the important part. So as we're wrapping up 2024, listen, guys, two things were important to me. The show wouldn't exist without Fuji, and they've been such a great partner for us. And I don't want to plug this in or create this into a commercial, but a lot of it is thanks to them. The show continues going on, and two, I do want to send a shout out to Gary, because Gary, he used to be on a show. He's focusing on other things, but he continues editing this. So as I have these awesome conversations, oftentimes he's kind of slips between the lines, and nobody even knows that he exists. But he's still around, and he does every single episode. He records every intro, and he edits them, and puts up with me. So Gary, shout out to Gary, and Gary puts up with so much, and such a great guy, and big shout out to him for everything that he does for this show, and then for everything else that happens here at the academy. And then, as always, take a peek at the RŌL TV, because that, again, is another sponsor of ours, and it keeps the show going. And my plan is still to get all of the Dirty Dozens on the show. I mean, I'm more than halfway, but there are still a few guys that it's very difficult to get to. That would be pretty cool, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Get all 12 of them.
Yeah, that would be pretty neat. Some of them are kind of stubborn. They don't like the public view, but listen, I'll get to them. Keep asking. That's how we can do. That's how we can do. Russ, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for hanging out with me for the last hour. Little behind the scenes, how the show operates. What's your perspective now?
It's a little different being on the opposite end of things, but new appreciation, and definitely for Gary always too. He also lets me wrist lock him a lot. So shout out to Gary for that too.
Shout out to Gary for that. Oh, shout out to Gary for that. Well, listen, thanks for hanging out with me for last hour. It was a great conversation. I'm glad we were able to do this, and I'm glad you stopped by. And congratulations again on the level of professor and the rank of professor, black belt.
Thank you.
That's a great accomplishment, and many aim for it. Not many make it to it. So definitely, it's worth mentioning, and I'm looking forward to everything that you bring to the table and watching you grow in next year and the years in front of us.
Thank you.
Let's wrap this up for today. Guys, thanks for listening to the show. RŌL Radio wouldn't exist without you, and I truly, truly appreciate it. We have a lot of stuff. Oh, look at that. I stumbled right at the end. We have a lot of cool stuff already lined up for 2025. So make sure, and I'm joking. Jeez, that's just an awful ending. And so make sure you guys tune in. Continue tuning in. Continue following the show. I appreciate everything you guys do. So much ahead. Let's wrap it up.
Thank you for listening to RŌL Radio. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to leave us a review and help us make the show even more amazing. For future episodes, check out our website and follow us on all major podcast platforms. Take care.